राम गाड़ी वाले।
बनारस में ही कबीर को गाना गंगा किनारे, इससे ज्यादा सुंदर, इससे ज्यादा आपको प्रकृति सृष्टि क्या मदद करेगी कबीर गाने में, क्योंकि बाकी तो कबीर ने लिखा ऐसा है कि आपके दिल से ही निकलेगा।
एक कहावत है यहाँ, रांड सांड साधु सन्यासी, उनसे बचे तो सेवे काशी।
Ladies and gentlemen, namaskar. Welcome to the 15th edition of the Jaipur Literature Festival, protected by Dettol, Banega Swasth India. And we are at Bank of Baroda, Mughal 10th. We're delighted to introduce Rediscovery of India. This session is presented by Dainik Bhaskar. India has one of the longest civilizational histories in the world. Celebrated author, politician, and former diplomat Pavan K Varma's latest book, The Great Hindu Civilisation, unravels the texts and legacies behind this ancient civilization and its many layers and belief systems, critically analyzing the questions of inherited religious beliefs versus the current trend of politicization. Varma takes us on an introspective journey through empires, leaders, colonization, and conquest. Varma's recent work includes the best-selling Adi Shankaracharya, Hinduism Greatest Thinker, and the Greatest Ode to Lord Ram, Tulsidas' Ramcharitmanas. In conversation with writer Sujata Prasad, Varma takes us through the changing and evolving ideas of India through centuries and millennia, and the unchanging core of Indian thoughts. Pavan K Varma is a writer, diplomat, and a politician who has authored over a dozen best-selling books, including Ghalib, The Man, The Times, The Great Indian Middle Class, The Book of Krishna, Being Indian, Becoming Indian, and Chanakya's New Manifesto. Varma is the recipient of the Atta Galata Bengaluru Literature Festival Prize, the Kalinga International Literary Award, and the Bhutan's highest civilian award. Sujatha Prasad is a writer, columnist, curator, and heritage conservationist. Her work and research interests cut across disciplines, intersecting with community health, education, rural livelihoods, and the visual and performing arts. A former civil servant, she is currently an advisor to the National Gallery of Modern Art. She also serves as an expert on the Ministry of Science and Technology's advisory group on heritage research. Please welcome them both.
I'm going to annotate what has been said about you earlier, at the risk of repeating myself, repeating what was said already. But I'm so delighted, first of all, not to be on a Zoom, staring at a Zoom screen. Secondly, to be in conversation with such a distinguished public intellectual, a person who's had a long and memorable career as a diplomat, and most of all, an author of 23 books. How incredible is that? And what sort of cerebral energy must have gone into it? Such audacious leaps of thought, to borrow a word from one of your books. He's also a person, unlike a majority of us who are flies on the ceiling. He engages with the political life of the country. I'm really happy to be here in conversation with you. Now, one of the first things that I'm going to ask is, a question that you must be really tired of answering. What is it that makes you choose a certain subject? What inspires you to write? I read in one of your interviews that you had gone to Bahari Sons in Khan Market. You'd taken a little walk and you were trying to get a book on Ghalib. This was in 1987-88. And somehow the book wasn't available, or the right kind of book wasn't available. So you ended up writing a book on Ghalib. 3 decades later, he again walked to Bahari Sons, his favorite bookstore in Khan Market, looking for a book on Adi Shankaracharya. History repeated itself. He ended up writing one. How delightfully random is the process. I'm sure it's not that random.
Thank you, Sujata. Such a pleasure being with all of you today. What you asked, in a sense, is the essence of what we are discussing today. Why is it that in our country, a leading bookshop does not have a book on Adi Shankaracharya? That is the question we have to ask ourselves. Why is it that apart from a pamphlet or two, there is no book on Mirza Ghalib? If you go to a bookstore in England and ask for a book on Eliot, it's doubtful if they'll say they have no book. And similarly, in this case, we need to actually think about what is the process by which a civilization becomes consciously and unconsciously alienated from its own civilizational wellsprings, where you are not expected to foist upon anyone an agenda to read or to write or to explore or to discover, but you are also not so completely unaware of what are obviously some of the great milestone achievements of your civilizational journey. And that is the question we must think about, all of us. I think one of the consequences, Sujata, of colonization is, and the fact that we are speaking here in English is the most ready example I can give, but it's no barrier. But one of the consequences of colonization is that you are gradually set adrift from some of your own cultural roots. And I think this is a lament, a malaise that we must examine at every point to discover and to rediscover. I, for instance, when I began to research my book on Adi Shankaracharya, obviously I knew something about both him and Advait, or the non-dual philosophy which he expounded in such profound and meticulous detail. But it is a discovery. It's a discovery to go to Kaladi in Kerala
It was not an easy ride for you at all. You traveled to several places associated with Adi Shankaracharya. You went to Kaladi, you went to Omkareshwar, you went to Kashi, that you've called the Harvard of philosophy in India. You went to Sringeri, to Joshibat, Dwarka, and Puri.
No, the
Not an
reason,
easy ride at all, and yet it must have been a really enthralling process.
yes, because you see, he died at the age of 32. If you are talking of Adi Shankaracharya, now he's born in Kaladi in Kerala. And he passes away or takes samadhi in Kedarnath. And the only means of travel is by foot. And he traverses the length and breadth of this country not once but more than once. And in the space of 32 years, he also produces some of the most profound commentaries on the Upanishads, on the Bhagavad-Gita, on the elaboration of what is truly a remarkable doctrine of Advait or Brahm. He sets into place 4 mutts.
Yes.
And they are many years before the British presumed that they created India, the civilisational map of India. The Sringeri in the south, there's Dwarka in the west, there's Puri in the east, and there's Badrinath or Joshimath in the north. That's the civilisational map of India. So, how does he achieve this in the space of 32 years? And what kind of journey did he make, walking from Kaladi first to Omkareshwar on the banks of the Narmada, where he remained in a hermitage with his chosen guru, learning about Advait, then to Kashi. From
And
Kashi,
he was only 8 years old at that time.
he was obviously a child prodigy. How did he compose? I mean, when you all of you must be hearing, some of you must be hearing the Nirvan Shatakam in the mornings. Na punyam, na papam, na sokhyam, na dukkham, na mantro, na tirtham, na vedo, na yagna, aham bhogyanam, na bhojyam, na bhokta, chidananda rupa shivoham shivoham. He's supposed to be the reviver of Hinduism. And he's negating all the institutional aspects of Hinduism. Na mantro, na tirtham, na vedo. That is an aside that Hinduism, there is no penalty yet, and perhaps it may come now, for blasphemy. You can say that there is no Veda, and there is only Chidanand, bliss and awareness, and you can go further and commit blasphemy by saying, I am Shiva, Shivoham Shivo. That Hinduism allows. So, he could write and negate. I mean, the Charvaks were part of Hinduism. They said that the Vedas are a bunch of lies. And 2000 years or more before Karl Marx, they said religion is the opium of the masses. They are considered Hindus. So now when we have these new straight-jacketed definitions of what it is to be a Hindu by some self-anointed thekedars of Hinduism, I want to ask them, I don't say this in terms of a critique. I want to ask them that by पढ़ तो लो, सोच तो लो, सुन तो लो, क्या कहा है उन्होंने? This conquering eclecticism of Hinduism is the reason for its tensile strength as a Sanatan Dharma. Not its brittleness, not its narrowness. So that is what we need to understand. And once we make the effort, we have to make the effort. If you make the effort to know a little more, for instance, that there is no one system of philosophy in Hinduism, that there are 6 systems. the Nyaya, the Vaisheshik, the Sankhya, the Yoga, the Purv Mimansh, the Uttar Mimansh. And then you've got to know that at least all six of them, and certainly 5 of them, can technically be called atheist. They are not talking about God. They are talking about what could be the ultimate truth behind the bewildering plurality of the cosmos. They are searching for truth. They are not configuring a deity. And therefore, technically, they can be called atheist. If you read, you'll understand why dialogue or Sabhya Samvad or Shastra is so important in Hinduism, where you listen as much as you say, and where it is not swearing at each other. I mean, the Upanishads, the 3 foundational texts of Hinduism, the Upanishads are a dialogue between a guru and a shishya. A question is asked, an answer is given.
In the Socratic tradition,
Yeah, Brahma Sutra, Bajarayan's Brahma Sutra, you will see in the hundreds and thousands of pages of tika written on that remarkably abbreviated aphorism, which is what the sutra is. You will see that invariably the commentator will admit the point of view of what he calls or she calls the opponent. You will bring into the picture also the differing point of view before you seek to arrive at a synthesis. And the 3rd foundational text, the Bhagavad-Gita, is again a dialogue. So where have we come with this fiat? बात पर वहां जुबान कटती है, मैं कहूं और सुना करे कोई. This is not our tradition.
Just, I'm now going to follow somewhat of a linear trajectory. You wrote these 3 books in 3 successive years: Adi Shankaracharya, a retelling of Ramcharitmanas, and then the Great Hindu Civilization. Did you plan them as a trilogy?
No, I didn't actually. I must be honest. Since there was so much debate these days on Hinduism, I said, कुछ पढ़ के हम भी सीखें तो क्या है, किस चीज पे इतनी बातचीत चल रही. And then they became fairly voluminous books. It's not as if we were ignorant, but it was a slightly bigger dive into each of them. And then you begin to get an idea of the sheer profundity of thought which actually animated either Tulsidas or Shankaracharya. And now in the Great Hindu Civilization, it's another kind of argument as well. And I can speak of each of them a little. I can say, I mean, for instance, if you read Ramcharitmanas.
I wanted to start with Ramcharitmanas. Speak a little, then I have a question for you.
No, I mean, for instance, Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas is both a narrative, a story, but he's a bhakti poet. So it is the absolute supremacy of the total surrender in spiritual terms to the deity. And the entire Ramcharitmanas, I made a selection, are usually also in the form of a dialogue. And then you begin to understand how much Tulsidas is influenced by the Advait philosophy. See, don't see Hinduism in compartments. That one part of Hinduism on the back of a 3-wheeler, another part somewhere else. It's a continuum. Tulsidas ji is saying that while the Advait sense of the absolute as totally nirguna is entirely valid, the devotee's sense of devotion seeks to have a manifestation of that attributeless Brahman And Ram has been created to provide that personal God to the deity.
So it bridges the binary between Nirgun and
Between
Sagun.
Nirgun and Sagun, as all Bhakti poets did.
And also the Shaivites and the Vaishnavites.
Well, you see, the one great thing about the Bhakti poets, and you can start from anywhere, start from Maharashtra, Tukaram, Namdev, go to Bihari, Vidyapati, Chandidas, Tulsidas, Surdas, Guru Nanak, Basavanna, Iqbal Prabhu, go to any of them. They are at one level bridging the schism between Shaiv and Vaishnav. Because they are saying that in that direct communion with God, this division is unimportant. They are against Brahmanical orthodoxy. They are against the compulsory intermediary of the priestly class. And very often they are against caste distinctions. In fact, most often. So it is a remarkable movement, the Bhakti movement, and Tulsidas ji is part of it. But when I see now weaponized version of Sri Ram, which is a good thing because Hinduism is not a passive religion.
I was just going to ask you that. Gandhi had called Ramcharitmanas as one of the greatest books in Indian tradition. But he also center staged Ram Rajya in contemporary discourse. And now with the increasing weaponization and politicization of Ram, what do you think from a rights perspective, what was the vision of Ram Rajya, Tulsidas's Ram Rajya?
No, first of all, you must understand that the contra to weaponization of Hinduism is not a passive religion. People say Gandhiji and others reduced Hinduism to an unacceptable degree of tolerance, even to injustice. That is not true. At the same time, the forced weaponization of what is a remarkably eclectic religion by instinct, temperament, and substance. For instance, Lakshmanji asked Sri Ram, what is the biggest dharma? And Sri Ram says, Par hit saris dharam nahi bhai. Par hit saris dharam nahi bhai. Par peeda sam nahi athamai. There is no greater dharma than the welfare, par hit, of another. And there is no greater sin than to cause injury to another. Now, this is what the highest definition of dharma in Ramcharitmanas given by Sri Ram with Tulsidas puts in his mouth. So, a very partial refraction from that larger legacy crystallized only in terms of exclusion or hatred or bigotry is wrong inferencing. And that is something we all need to understand. अरे कितने religions थे, कितने civilizations थे जो कि खाक में मिल चुके हैं. एक Hindu civilization, as I call it because I have written a book on it, एक Hindu धर्म है that has survived over millennia. उसके क्या कारण होंगे? And we have to understand what those strengths are.
Talking about Adi Shankaracharya, you have in that book mentioned that the Advaita philosophy has been validated by contemporary science, by cosmology, by quantum physics, by neurology. Would you like to explain that a little bit?
Well, in this book, there is a chapter called The Remarkable Validation of Science. Now, I want to distinguish this chapter from one aspect of the larger Hindutva school, which believes that everything that is happening today and will happen tomorrow had happened during ancient India. In other words, we had aeroplanes, we had cars, we had television, we had plastic
Mr.
surgery.
Dina
We had
Batra type of school.
I call it the Nath Batra School of History. So that is not what I'm trying to do. I'm saying that the notion of the supremacy ultimately of an all-pervasive cosmic consciousness, that is a drisht beyond sight, a chintya beyond the mind, akhand indivisible, nirvishesh chin matram, undifferentiated consciousness, which is sarva pratyay darshan and supremely intelligent, and which is nirguna, which is purna, complete in every respect. It's omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, and which is beyond attributes. It requires great audacity of thought to actually conceptualize the absolute without attributes. Nirguna, neti neti, not this, not this, because any other definition will circumscribe it. Now, when I began to study physics and quantum physics and the relative reality of transient phenomena, I began to understand that there is a remarkable correspondence between the conceptualization of the universe in Advait philosophy and the cutting edge inferences of science today. And there is not enough time today, but I would ask any of you who are interested that it's available in the book and you can go through it if you like.
Now coming to a slightly difficult question that you've touched upon. By being adrift from our philosophical moorings, and you've said that this is the post-colonial consciousness, what scholars like Akil Bilgrami has called cognitive enslavement, that has led the elite, especially of this country, to be adrift from its moorings. And it's leading to a hardening of Hindutva, what Ramila Thapar, who's not one of your favorites, has called syndicated Hinduism. And recently, I think it was last year in the US, 40 universities came together to do a major session on Hindutva. Universities like Harvard, Berkeley, Princeton, and there was a solid fringe group that attacked the organizers and the participants of this event. How would you view an event like this one? It was called the dismantling of Hindutva.
You know, there are two aspects of Hindutva. If Hindutva is the essence of Hinduism, I have no problem with it. I have problem with...
But there's such a conflation of Hinduism with Hindutva.
No, not necessarily. But political Hindutva I have a problem with because it is hugely selective and it is very often used as a means of dividing people on the basis of religion in order to maximize short-term political gain. So it leads to a distortion of Hinduism. And tomorrow there is a session on the Republic of Hindutva where I will speak more of it. I'm not averse to a dialogue. I have just made a strong statement how Hinduism validates dialogue. So if a group of American universities want to critique some notions of Hindutva here, let's have a dialogue rather than a dialogue between the deaf and the dumb. My problem is that there are some entrenched schools of Indology in the West, which in the hubris, the confidence that what they say will not be questioned by followers of Hinduism.
But there were some Indian scholars and poets present there.
No. As I said, I'm not against a dialogue, but let me talk of, say, for instance, Wendy Doniger. She says there is no such thing as Hinduism. It's a cross between a hedgehog and an armadillo. Now, when you make a statement like this in supreme confidence, merely because Hinduism consciously allows for diversity beyond the certitudes of Abrahamic faiths, then you show chaos anxiety which doesn't exist in Hinduism. There is perfect unity in diversity, or diversity in unity. But these are judgments passed on reflex. And actually, she said this when she wrote a 600 or 700 page book on Hinduism, and there were certain aspects of it which were critiqued by some Hindus, including those of the ultra-right, ultra-Hindu right. She actually said that I was gobsmacked because I never realized that a book on Hinduism will be read by Hindus themselves. In other words, you write a 700 page book in English, which can be translated into other languages, including Hindi, and you expect that a nation of 1.2 billion people, even if you assume some of them are illiterate, will never read the book. So you cannot write for your own echo chamber with certain presumptions that you have derived about a religion to which you were neither born nor have you fully understood from my point of view. So it is perfectly valid as she makes a certain critique or a comment, I have the right to interrogate it. The problem is when acrimony comes, when the good intentions of either side are questioned to the point of the annihilation of dialogue. Today, what is happening that worries me in my country is that dialogue has been subverted by immediately suspecting the other person's credentials. That is something we have to guard against. So that's my comment on it. Hindutva or Hinduism, and Hindutva is the essence of Hinduism, is not some fragile, insecure legacy that will be shattered if 50 scholars meet anywhere in the world to discuss it.
I just want to drift away a little and talk about Ashish Naddi. He's spoken about imperialism of categories. So he's, conceptually analyzed categories like secularism. And he says that this is, in a sense, a superimposition upon us. We should have instead, as a civilization, focused on coexistence, religious coexistence. How do you look at this?
No. I look at secularism, the word has acquired a pejorative context these days. But I look upon secularism as Sarv Dharm Sambhav, where you don't have to deny your own faith in order to genuinely respect another's faith. What used to happen was that a lot of very shallow cosmopolitanism had begun to substitute for secularism. In my book, The Great Hindu Civilization, I quote a conversation of another writer, scholar, Gurcharan Das, in a drawing room company in Delhi, where he says that he's going to take a sabbatical and research the Dharma Shastras, read the Bhagavad Puran again, and study the Mahabharata. And the comment of one of the people there was, "Oh, are you becoming a Sanghi, my friend?" Now, this kind of reflects that if you wish to explore further the roots of your own culture, it automatically makes you a prisoner of the past. And that disassociation makes you less secular. Is, in my view, a very damaging notion because it has led to a great deal of backlash in India. There is nothing wrong in being conversant with your own culture, spirituality, religious tradition, not as compulsion, but as choice. In fact, one of my great laments also, Sujata, is that Hindus, at least Hindus I can speak about, uh, are very often the least informed about the great legacy to which they are heir. What are the rituals? What are their symbolisms? What are the fundamental beliefs? What is the larger vision, the concept? What is the search? What is the thirst? What is the yearning for? These have been put there. And sometimes if you are researching them, or I mean, for this book, I was criticized by the left. And because of some of my conclusions, I was criticized by the right. So I must have been doing something right.
Thank you. We have 12 minutes for questions, but is there anything else that you might want to speak about that you feel that I could have asked but didn't ask?
ये तो आपको सोचना चाहिए, but anyway, no, I generally want to make a point that, and I want to take off from what you asked me. You see, a lot of damage has been done in the name of being more secular than you need to be. By that I mean not being less secular. By that I mean to be deliberately less than knowledgeable about your culture, civilization, legacy, roots, tradition, even folklore, was supposed to be a bigger certificate that you are genuinely secular than it needed to be. I mean, people have said today who wanted to underplay any attempt at glorifying Hinduism in the past. They said there is no such. I have quoted them. I have given the names of the scholars. There is no such word as Hindu. There was no recognition of Hindus. There is no such thing as civilization that can be associated to Hinduism. There is no such religion called Hinduism. Wendy Doniger actually asked him, dare I write it with a capital H? That Amartya Sen says, why do we call it a Hindu civilization? In fact, it was predominantly Buddhist. I mean, there are arguments that have been made. So this is
part of our dialogic, plural, tolerant tradition to argue.
No, I'm not. I just say that if the motive behind that is to hit the ultra-Hindu right, which seeks to irrationally glorify Hinduism, the response is not to deliberately devalue Hinduism. And we need to think about these things because there is a backlash today. The needle has moved. We need sane Hinduism. We need a Hinduism which is linked to the legacy as it actually is, rather than its distortions. But for that, we all have to require a little more knowledge of this great legacy to which we are heir.
We've probably reached an inflection point. We only have 9 minutes now for questions, and I know there are going to be a lot of questions. Yes, this lady in black.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. Hi. So, you know what? I just wanted to mention your comment, Sujata, about the Dismantling Hindutva conference. I just want everybody in the audience also to know that it was really so. Let's say in a Harvard, in a Stanford University, there would be a department of gender studies. In that gender studies department, there will be a center for study of Black identity. Usme there was a fake kind of a letter written to somebody, and some clerk there said yes. So this has nothing. Please don't say it as Harvard or Stanford. It was. In fact, there's a lawsuit now brewing against the organizers.
But 40 universities. This could be one random case.
No, there are many. There are many. So for all of them, our research shows that and I'm at Stanford, so I know exactly what happened at Stanford and at UC San Diego, where Pradeep Khosla is the vice chancellor, and he mentioned to us also that this went to a very sidey center somewhere where some, office assistant, administrative, somebody said yes. And then they would say, UC San Diego has endorsed this. So it's a pretty fake. So I don't want anybody in the audience to think that any of these US universities had actually really endorsed it. It was really quite a sleight of hand. And people are horrified in the US that people like Audrey Truschke and Chris Jaffrelot and Thomas Blom Hansen and these guys are talking about Hinduism in such disparaging tones. So just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Thank you. So if I ask myself, when did this narrative start? This imposed narrative on India, right? This slavery of categories or whatever. It turns out that it's from 1818, from a seminal book that was written by John Stuart Mill's father, James Mill, The History of British India, right? It's in 3 volumes, published in 1818. And this was the prescribed textbook for every member of the Indian civil service, your predecessors, right? So they would have an internship for a year at Oxford. Arnold Toynbee and others were the people who were teaching them, right? This was at Balliol College. And this was the prescribed textbook. Now, what does this textbook do? It does a double whitewash, right? First, it whitewashes the British imperial excesses. And I'm using the word mildly. What are those excesses? Until 1836, slavery had not been abolished in the British Empire. Right? So British parliamentarians, including the father of William Gladstone, John Gladstone, he's the biggest slave owner in the world, right? He has 2,000 slaves. So they whitewash all of that. And secondly, they whitewash the Indian accomplishments in whatever field. And what do they impose? That it's an oppressive category with regard to caste and oppression of women. It's so bad that when the 5th edition of this book is published in the 1850s, H.H. Wilson, who's the Bowdoin professor of Sanskrit at Oxford, also at Balliol College, he is embarrassed and he writes all these footnotes, which says, look, James Mill is claiming all this, but the reality is this. He claims that Calcutta is unsafe for women. The statistics show that Paris and London are far more unsafe for women, etc., etc. And then the crowning irony is that in 1975, when the University of Chicago Press republishes the 3 volumes of the history of British India, they wipe out all the footnotes. These are all things that you can verify. So it's a double whitewash that is happening, which has not even been looked at. I stumbled upon this and I just thought I'd share some of this with you.
Now, this is very true. And I think you've raised an important point. You see, what is the purpose of a colonial power? It is to glorify itself and legitimize its right to rule you and devalue the culture and of the people it has come to rule. And so this is one example. There are many more which literally demonize not only culture and civilization, but also the Hindu religion. The problem that I grapple with in many of my books, including Being Indian, Ghalib, Adi Shankaracharya, and so on and so forth, is have we yet come out fully from the colonization of the mind? Colonization was less about physical subjugation. Colonization was about the colonization of the mind. And post-colonial societies often are the least aware of the degree to which their mind has been colonized. So it's an important project. A project that must be done by not allowing this pendulum to swing to the other extreme by saying that there was no exploitation in India or in Hinduism, or that there has been no gender oppression in Hinduism. Somewhere a middle ground has to be arrived at with the right degree of scholarly objectivity.
There's a chapter in your book where you have critiqued, the problems in Indian society. Yes, the person who is waving wildly.
Hello, Pavanji. I'm from Bhutan. I just want to ask you, are you saying that Shankaracharya should be given credit for founding non-duality? Don't you think it's Buddha?
It's a good question because Shankaracharya was known as a klepto-Buddhist,
Okay,
although he revived Hinduism. But my own view is that there are great similarities between Hinduism and Buddhism at the level of metaphysics. But the specific notion, I mean, for instance, the Buddhist notion of shunyat is quite similar to the manner in which Shankaracharya negates transient empirical phenomena.
okay, just one quick question. As an ex-diplomat, don't you think you would have been much better off selling Buddha? Because there's supposedly about 500 million Buddhists in the world, and out of which 300 millions are in China, which is sort of your biggest competitor. And religion plays a very important role in our life. So India could have really waived Buddha instead of Shankaracharya, who's practically not known in China.
He's
Good
done
question.
23 books. The 24th one
It's a
would
good
be
question,
on the-
sir, except that I have great respect for Buddhism. But I'm an author, I'm not a book salesman.
I think we just have time for one last question. Okay, two questions. Come on. Yeah, I know. We have to ask.
Thank you.
her
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah, thanks for such a wonderful discussion. My question about your Shankaracharya book is, he travels at the age of 8 from Kerala to Madhya Pradesh to on the banks of Narmada and discusses with his, who becomes his guru. But I always wondered in what language were they discussing? He might be speaking Keralite.
Sanskrit. Sir.
And if Sanskrit was so popular that it was spoken from stretches of Kerala to up to north, what was the result that it...
In the Brahmin class.
Okay.
A lady over there, here.
Thank you. A quick question. We talked about weaponizing Hindutva. We talked about the need of people learning their own, the background where they come from. But as a leader, do you have any plan of how the people really learn Hindutva? Because it's the fact that Hindus don't know Hindutva as, they have not studied as they're supposed to. But it is also a fact that it was not taught to us. Always, all the political parties talk about being secular, but they're secular about other religions. But the Hindu leaders themselves are not secular about Hinduism. And you are a leader.
I think I defined secularism as best as I understand is, which is to have the ability to respect other faiths without denying that you believe in your own. I don't believe I am secular if I say I'm less Hindu. At the same time, I think as a leader, what I want to share with people, and I do it with great humility, is that perhaps it's in your own self-interest to understand a little more of what is the precise legacy of Hinduism. Because if tomorrow you are told, this is what you should eat, this is what you should drink, this is how you should dress, especially where women are concerned, this is how you should pray, this is the number of times you should go to temples, this is the way that you must celebrate festivals, and so on and so forth, then you must have the knowledge wherewithal to ask, on whose authority are you creating this prescriptive religion for me? And I think therefore it's in the self-interest of Hindus and of people of all faiths to know a little more about their legacy.
We'll take the rest of the questions during book signing. Please do buy his book. Can I show them a copy of this book, please? It's a wonderful book. We can all vouch for it. Please do take a copy and get it autographed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a pleasure.
We thank Pavan and Sujata for this very immersive discussion and end today's sessions. We also thank Dainik Bhaskar for their support. Yeah, both the authors will be available to sign their books on my left and on your right. So you have